The train made a loud screeching sound like a big metal monster as it slowed down. It was pulling into the dusty train station of Redemption Gulch. It was late spring in 1888, and the air was thick with fine red dirt from Arizona. The dirt tasted like metal and dry earth. The sun was like a hot oven in the big blue sky, beating down on the metal roof of the train station and the few wooden buildings that made up the small town. A small crowd of people had gathered on the wooden platform. Most were men wearing old jeans and cowboy hats. Some women wore simple cotton dresses. Their faces showed they were either excited or bored about the train coming in. Among all the people getting off the train, Sarah stood out. She wasn't particularly pretty, though she had nice features under all the travel dirt. But what made her different was how weak and fragile she looked. Like the dust on her dark, sensible dress. She held tight to a small, beat-up suitcase. The leather was scratched and peeling like it had been through a really hard trip. Just like her. Her eyes were a beautiful blue color, but they darted around nervously at all the strange faces. You could see desperation in them. She was young, maybe 22 years old, but she looked tired like someone much older. Each step down the train's metal stairs was hard work. Her legs were shaking under her dot. Sarah had been traveling for days, maybe weeks. She couldn't remember exactly how long, because the train's rhythm and the worry in her stomach made everything blur together. She had come from the east, from a life that had become impossible to live. She was driven by desperate hope and a single, old letter, the letter now wrinkled and sweaty in her pocket, had promised her a new start, a husband, and a home in this harsh land. It was a big risk, her last hope, but what other choice did she have? The platform swirled around her with lots of shouting, steam from the train, and the sounds of cattle being loaded onto freight cars. The smell of coal smoke mixed with the sharp smell of horse sweat and the faint sweet smell of distant sagebrush. Sarah felt dizzy. Her vision got blurry around the edges. The heat was dry and heavy, pressing in on her and making it hard to breathe. She hadn't eaten properly in days. Her small amount of money was running out with each mile. She had eaten her last biscuit hours ago, and her water bottle was empty, leaving only a metallic taste in her mouth. She stumbled. Her suitcase slipped from her hands and hit the platform with a soft thud. A sharp pain shot through her head, and the world tilted dangerously. She tried to steady herself by grabbing a wooden post, but her fingers felt numb and wouldn't work right. The faces around her seemed to change into unclear blurs. Their voices faded into a distant hum. A wave of sickness washed over her, and her knees gave out. Just as the rough wooden planks of the platform rushed up to meet her, a shadow fell over her. Ethan Cole had been leaning against a water tower, watching the train arrive with the bored interest of a man who saw them come and go every week. He was a cowboy, though not the kind who chased cattle across huge plains for months. His ranch, a small place a few miles outside Redemption Gulch, was his life. He was a man who didn't talk much. His face was weathered by sun and wind, and his eyes were a steady, watching gray. He'd seen plenty of newcomers arrive, full of wide-eyed wonder or silly hope, only to quickly learn how harsh life in the territory really was. He'd noticed the woman as she got off the train. Her pale face and hesitant movements. She looked like she'd been through hell. He wasn't one to get involved in other people's business, but there was something about how vulnerable she looked that caught his eye. It was such a contrast to the rough and tough crowd around them. Saw her stumble, saw her suitcase drop, and then, with a suddenness that surprised even him, he saw her collapse. She went down like a tree that had been cut down. A faint gasp escaped her lips before she hit the ground with a soft thud. A few heads turned. A murmur went through the crowd, but no one immediately moved. In the Old West, people were often too busy with their own problems to rush to help a stranger, especially one who looked so completely defeated. But Ethan moved. It wasn't a thought-out decision, more like instinct. He pushed off from the water tower. His long legs covered the distance in a few quick steps. He knelt beside her, his hat brim shading her face. Her skin was gray and pale. Her lips were cracked, and a thin layer of sweat covered her forehead, despite how pale she was. She was breathing in short, shallow breaths, her chest barely moving. "She's fainted," he heard someone say. It was a woman's voice, mixed with pity and giving up. Ethan ignored them. He gently touched her wrist, feeling for a heartbeat. It was weak and unsteady, but it was there. He looked around. The station master, a fat man named Yebediah, was busy with a stack of shipping papers. The other passengers were either moving on or just staring. No one was stepping forward. He knew what this meant. A woman alone who had collapsed at a train station with no one to take care of her. In Redemption Gulch, this was an invitation for trouble, for someone to take advantage of her, for a fate far worse than just being hungry and exhausted. He didn't know her or her story, but he knew the rules of this land. And he knew, with a sudden certainty he couldn't shake, that he couldn't just leave her there. A sense of quiet urgency came over him. He had to do something, and quickly. His eyes swept over her fragile form, then to the dusty platform, then to the uncaring faces of the crowd. A decision, quick and without too much thinking, formed in his mind. It was unusual, maybe even dangerous, but it felt like the only right thing to do. He would not let her become another victim of the West's unforgiving nature. "Yebediah," Ethan called out. His voice was low but firm, cutting through the leftover noise from the train. Yebediah walked over, wiping his forehead with a dirty handkerchief. "What's the trouble, Ethan? Another one of them Eastern ladies can't handle a bit of sun." His tone was dismissive. He was used to mail-order brides arriving, many of whom found the West much harder than they expected. "She needs help," Ethan stated, his gaze steady. "She's fainted. Got no one here." Jebediah sighed, a puff of dust escaping his lips. "Well, what do you expect me to do? We ain't got no doctor in town. Not a proper one, anyway. And the boarding house is full up." He waved vaguely towards the dusty street. "She'd have to wait it out in the shade, I reckon." Ethan's jaw tightened. That ain't an option. He knew what waiting it out often meant for a woman alone and helpless in a town like Redemption Gulch. It meant becoming prey. He thought of the rough men who hung around the saloons, the drifters, the people who took advantage of others. Sarah, lying there, pale and helpless, was like a target for trouble. He looked down at her again. Her face showed total exhaustion. He didn't know her name, where she came from, or why she was here, but he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that she couldn't be left to the mercy of this place. His gaze swept over the small crowd again. A few men were still watching, their expressions ranging from curiosity to something darker. He had to act, and he had to act quickly. Taking a deep breath, Ethan made his move. He gently slid one arm under Sarah's shoulders and the other under her knees, lifting her with surprising ease. She was very light, proof of her obvious starvation. He carried her towards the small shaded area near the station house, away from the direct glare of the sun and the prying eyes of the crowd. "Someone get some water," he called out. His voice carried more authority than he usually showed. A young woman, the wife of a local store owner, hurried forward with a tin cup and a small water bottle. Ethan carefully lowered Sarah to the ground, propping her head against his saddlebag, which he'd gotten from his horse. He dipped his fingers in the water and gently put it on her lips, then on her forehead. After a moment, her eyelids fluttered. She let out a soft moan. Her blue eyes slowly opened, unfocused and confused. Her gaze landed on Ethan, a stranger with a kind but stern face, framed by the brim of his dusty hat. Confusion clouded her features, then a flicker of fear as she tried to remember where she was and what had happened. "You're all right, ma'am," Ethan said. His voice was a low rumble. "You fainted. Just take it easy." Sarah tried to sit up, but a wave of dizziness washed over her. She fell back, her hand automatically reaching for her head. Where am I?" she whispered. Her voice was weak and dry. "Redemption Gulch," Ethan replied. "Train station. You took a tumble." He offered her the cup of water. "Drink this." Slow, she took a careful sip. The cool liquid felt good on her dry throat. As she drank, her eyes, though still hazy, began to take in her surroundings. The dusty platform, the departing train, the curious onlookers, and then the reality of her situation hit her. She was alone, vulnerable, and clearly not in a position to do whatever she had come here to do. A fresh wave of despair washed over her, threatening to make her collapse again. Ethan watched her, reading the growing fear in her eyes. He knew what she was thinking. He knew the unspoken questions that hung in the air, questions about her future, her safety. He had to cut through it, had to offer a solution before the troublemakers moved. In doubt, he leaned closer. His voice dropped to almost a whisper, though it was still loud enough for Yebediah and the few others who had stayed nearby to hear. "Ma'am," he began. His gray eyes were steady on hers. "I don't know your name or why you came here, but you're in a bad way and you ain't got no one. This ain't a place for a woman alone and helpless." Sarah's eyes widened, a flicker of understanding, then dread. She knew the dangers. She had heard the stories. "I ain't one for talk," Ethan continued. His gaze didn't waver. "And I ain't one for charity. Not exactly. But I got a ranch a few miles out. It's small, but it's honest, and I need a wife. Sarah stared at him, bewildered. A wife? This stranger who had just helped her off the ground was asking her to marry him. Her mind, still clouded by exhaustion and shock, struggled to understand. His words. Ethan didn't wait for a response. He pressed on, his tone matter-of-fact, almost businesslike. It would be a marriage of convenience, plain and simple. You'd have a roof over your head, food in your belly, and protection. I'd have a wife to help with the ranch, keep a home. No questions asked about your past. No expectations beyond what's necessary. We'd make it work. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I'm Ethan Cole, and I'm offering you a way out, right now, before things get worse. Sarah looked at the ground, then at her trembling hands. The alternative was too scary to think about. This was a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. She took another deep breath, the dust still sticking to her lungs. Yes, she whispered. The single word was barely a breath, yet it carried the weight of desperate hope. Yes, I will. And so, under the harsh glare of the Arizona sun, among the leftover steam of the train and the curious stares of a handful of onlookers, a cowboy named Ethan Cole and a collapsed, nameless bride were married. Reverend Miller, a man used to the strange ways of the frontier, performed the brief ceremony. His words echoed oddly against the backdrop of a busy train station. Sarah, still weak and confused, barely registered the vows. Her mind was a fog of exhaustion and disbelief. Ethan, for his part, repeated his promises with quiet seriousness. His gray eyes were fixed on the horizon, already planning for a future he had never imagined moments ago. He had taken a wife without asking a single thing about her, driven only by a silent promise to himself to offer her a chance at something better than the fate that awaited her on that dusty platform. Sarah woke up to the unfamiliar scent of wood smoke and brewing coffee, a stark contrast to the harsh smell of coal and dust that had filled her dreams. For a moment, confusion reigned. Where was she? The soft, unfamiliar mattress beneath her, the rough log walls of the room, the faint light filtering through a small glass window. None of it matched the fleeting memories of her journey or the chaos of the train station. Then it all rushed back. The dizzying heat, the collapse, the kind yet firm stranger, the whispered proposal, the hasty ceremony. She was married to a cowboy she didn't know, in a town she barely remembered seeing. A wave of both relief and deep worry washed over her. Relief that she was safe, worry about the unknown future that stretched before her. She pushed herself up, her muscles ached, and her head was still a dull throb. The room was simple, clean, and bare. A rough wooden bed, a small chest of drawers, and a single chair made up the furniture. A thick, hand-stitched quilt covered her. She noticed her suitcase carefully placed beside the bed. A quiet creak of floorboards outside the door was followed by a soft knock. You awake, ma'am? Ethan's voice, low and steady, came from the other side. Yes, she managed. Her voice was still a little raspy. The door opened slowly, showing Ethan. He stood framed in the doorway, a tin cup in one hand, his hat in the other. He looked less scary without the hat. His dark hair was a little messy, but his gray eyes still held the same quiet intensity she remembered. Thought you might be, he said, stepping inside. He didn't approach the bed directly. Instead, he set the cup on the small chest of drawers. Coffee's hot. Got some stew on the stove too. You must be hungry. Sarah's stomach rumbled in agreement, a sharp reminder of her long fast. Thank you, she murmured, feeling a blush creep up her neck. This was her husband, a man she had known for less than a day, and she was still in bed, feeling utterly vulnerable. No need for thanks, he replied. His gaze swept over her, checking her condition. You look a mite better than yesterday. You gave us all a scare. He paused, then added, my name's Ethan Cole. I suppose you heard that yesterday, but it bears repeating. Sarah, she said. Her voice was a little stronger. Sarah Miller. It was the name she had been given at birth, the only truth she felt she could offer. She hesitated, wanting to explain, to apologize for the inconvenience, but the words caught in her throat. How did one explain a lifetime of bad luck and a desperate escape to a stranger who had just married you out of necessity? Ethan simply nodded. Sarah, good to know. Well, if you're up to it, come on out when you're ready. No rush, he turned to leave, then paused at the door. This is a small place. Just me and now you. We'll figure things out. With that, he was gone, leaving Sarah alone in the quiet room. His words, no rush and no questions asked about your past, echoed in her mind. He was keeping his end of the bargain. He hadn't pressed her for details, hadn't demanded explanations. It was a silent agreement, a fragile truce born of necessity. She was grateful for it. Yet a part of her felt the weight of her unspoken past, a heavy burden she carried. She dressed quickly in her only other dress, a faded blue cotton, feeling strangely formal for a ranch house. When she came out into the main room, she found it to be a single large space, serving as kitchen, dining, area, and living room. A stone fireplace took up one wall. A sturdy wooden table and 2 chairs stood in the center, and shelves lined with practical items, tins, jars. A few well-worn books filled the remaining space. It was bare, but perfectly clean, showing a quiet order. Ethan was at the stove, stirring a pot of stew. The smell was rich and savory, making her mouth water. He turned as she entered, offering a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Sit," he gestured to the table. He dished out 2 generous portions of stew into tin bowls, and poured 2 cups of coffee. They ate in silence. The only sounds were the clinking of spoons against tin and the crackling of the fire. Sarah ate slowly at first, savoring each mouthful, then with more urgency as her hunger took over. The stew was simple but hearty, filled with vegetables and tender meat. It was the most nourishing meal she'd had in weeks. Ethan ate steadily. His gaze was often fixed on the window, looking out at the expanse of dry land and the distant jagged mountains. He wasn't ignoring her. Not exactly, but his presence was one of quiet observation rather than conversation. It was clear he wasn't a man for idle chatter. When they finished, he cleared the bowls. "If you're feeling up to it, there's some chores to be done. Nothing too hard today. Just gathering eggs. Maybe feeding the chickens. I can show you." Sarah nodded, relieved to have something to do, something to focus on other than the awkward silence and the enormity of her new reality. "I can help," she said. Her voice was gaining a little strength. "I'm not afraid of work." "Didn't figure you were," he replied. There was a hint of something that might have been approval in his tone. He led her outside into the blinding sunlight and the vast open space. The ranch was indeed small. A small, sturdy house, a barn, a chicken coop, and a corral holding a few horses. The land stretched out, dry and scrubby, dotted with mesquite and cactus. It was beautiful in its starkness, but also daunting. He showed her the chicken coop, explaining how to gather the eggs and how to scatter feed. His instructions were clear, concise, and without unnecessary words. Sarah listened intently, absorbing every detail. She had grown up on a small farm in the East, so the basics of animal care weren't entirely foreign to her, though the scale and the environment were vastly different. As they worked, a comfortable silence settled between them. It wasn't the awkward silence of earlier, but a shared quiet, the kind that comes from 2 people working side by side, each focused on their task. Ethan occasionally offered a brief instruction or pointed out something she needed to know about the ranch. He didn't pry, didn't ask about her past, didn't even ask about the letter that had brought her to Redemption Gulch. He simply treated her as a new, albeit unexpected, partner in the daily rhythm of ranch life. Sarah, for her part, found a strange comfort in the routine. The physical labor, the simple tasks, grounded her. It kept her mind from spiraling into the anxieties of her past or the uncertainties of her future. She watched Ethan, his movements efficient and strong, his quiet dedication to his land evident in every action. He was a man of his word. She realized he had offered her a home, and he was providing it without demanding anything beyond her presence and her help. As the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in fiery hues of orange and purple, Sarah stood by the porch, watching Ethan tend to his horses. The vastness of the land, the quiet hum of the evening, and the steady presence of this stranger-turned-husband filled her with a complex mix of emotions. Fear was still there, a lingering shadow, but so too was a beginning sense of security. She was a bride who had collapsed at a train station, married without a single question, and now she was here, at the edge of a new life, with a man who respected her silence, at least for now. The dust of her past still clung to her, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a faint whisper of hope, a fragile seed planted in the harsh, beautiful soil of the West. The days at the coal ranch settled into a rhythm, a steady pace dictated by the sun, the needs of the animals, and the endless demands of the land. Sarah, true to her word, proved herself to be a hard worker. She learned quickly, adapting to the unfamiliar routines with a quiet determination that impressed Ethan, though he rarely said so out loud. She mastered the art of milking the 2 cows, collecting eggs from the skittish hens, and tending to the small vegetable patch that Ethan had carefully coaxed from the dry soil. Her hands, once soft, began to toughen. Her movements gained a newfound efficiency. Ethan, for his part, remained a man of few words. Their conversations were largely practical. Instructions about chores, observations about the weather, or brief discussions about supplies needed from town. Yet within this silence, a subtle understanding began to grow. Sarah observed him, watched the way he moved with his horses, the gentle patience he showed a nervous mare, the unwavering focus he brought to mending a fence or repairing a broken tool. She saw his quiet strength, his unwavering honesty in his dealings, and his deep respect for the land he worked. He was a man of integrity, she realized, a stark contrast to many she had encountered in her past. He, in turn, observed her. He noticed the way she hummed softly to herself as she kneaded dough for bread, the quiet satisfaction in her eyes when the garden yielded its first ripe tomatoes, the way she treated the animals with a gentle hand. He saw the lingering weariness in her eyes, but also a resilience that surprised him. He never pressed her about her past, honoring their unspoken agreement, but he sensed a deep-seated sorrow, a shadow that occasionally flickered across her face when her guard was down. Small acts of kindness, unspoken and unassuming, began to bridge the gap between them. One sweltering afternoon, as Sarah struggled to haul water from the well, Ethan appeared, taking the heavy buckets from her hands without a word and carrying them to the house. Another evening, he returned from town with a small, carefully wrapped package, a bar of scented soap, a rare luxury that brought a faint, grateful smile to her lips. He never commented on her cooking, but she noticed he always ate every bite, and sometimes a quiet satisfaction would settle in his eyes as he savored a particularly well-made pie. It was the weather, as it often was in the West, that truly forced them to confront their shared reality and forge a deeper connection. The sky had been a bruised purple all morning. The air was heavy and still, pregnant with an unspoken threat. By early afternoon, the wind began to howl, a mournful rising shriek that whipped the dust into blinding cyclones. "Dust storm coming," Ethan announced. His voice was grim as he peered out the window. "A bad one. We need to batten down everything." Sarah had never witnessed a true western dust storm. The ones back east were mere squalls in comparison. This was different. The sky turned an ominous yellowish brown, then a deep, suffocating brown. The sun vanished, swallowed by the advancing wall of grit. The wind became a physical force, rattling the windows, tearing at the eaves of the house. "Help me get the animals." In the barn, Ethan shouted over the roar of the wind. They worked frantically, side by side, their movements synchronized by the urgency of the moment. Ethan herded the horses and cows into the relative shelter of the barn, while Sarah, coughing and squinting against the stinging dust, helped him secure the doors and windows. The chickens, squawking in panic, were shooed into their coop, and its entrance was reinforced. Inside the barn, the air was thick with dust, but it was a haven compared to the chaos outside. The wind howled like a banshee, rattling the wooden walls, threatening to tear the roof from its supports. The horses whinnied nervously, stomping. "Their hooves, it'll pass," Ethan said. His voice was strained, but calm as he checked the latches one last time. He turned to Sarah, his face streaked with dirt, his eyes red-rimmed. "You all right?" Sarah nodded, wiping dust from her eyes with the back of her hand. "Just never seen anything like it." They huddled together in the dim light of the barn, listening to the fury outside. The storm raged for hours, a relentless assault. As the hours dragged on, the initial fear gave way to a strange camaraderie. They were two individuals bound by an unconventional marriage, facing down the raw power of nature. At one point, a loud crack echoed from the side of the barn. Ethan immediately moved, grabbing a lantern. "Something hit the wall," he said. His voice was tight. "Might be a beam's loose." Sarah, despite her fear, followed him. By the flickering light of the lantern, they saw a large crack running through one of the support beams. Dust poured in through the fissure. "Hold this," Ethan instructed, handing her the lantern. He grabbed a heavy timber and a hammer. "I need to brace it. Hold steady." Sarah held the lantern high. Her hands were trembling, but her gaze was fixed on Ethan. He worked quickly, efficiently, his muscles straining as he hammered the brace into place. The dust swirled around them, making it difficult to see, but he didn't falter. He was utterly focused, a man in his element, battling the elements. Finally, with a grunt of effort, he secured the brace. The immediate danger was averted. He straightened, up, wiping sweat and dust from his brow. "That'll hold for now," he said. His voice was a little hoarse. He looked at Sarah, and for the first time, their eyes met with something beyond polite acknowledgement. There was a shared understanding, a silent recognition of their mutual reliance in the face of the storm. Their roles as husband and wife, however unconventional, had become undeniably real. As the storm began to subside, the wind dying down to a mournful sigh, Sarah felt a subtle shift within her. The fear of her past, the burden of her secrets, still lingered, but they were now accompanied by a growing sense of trust in the man beside her. He hadn't asked her story, but he had stood by her, protected her, and worked with her. He was a silent anchor in a turbulent world. Later that evening, back in the house, after the dust had settled and the stars began to emerge in a newly washed sky, Sarah sat by the fire, a cup of warm tea in her hands. Ethan was outside, checking on the remaining damage. She watched the flickering flames, and a memory, unbidden, surfaced: a flash of a crowded street, a harsh voice, the desperate scramble to escape. It was fleeting, a mere glimpse. But it was the first time she had allowed herself to acknowledge the true depth of the fear that had driven her west. She knew, deep down, that her past wouldn't stay buried forever. But for now, in the quiet warmth of Ethan's home, after facing down the fury of the West together, she felt a fragile sense of peace. The seeds of trust had been planted, slowly but surely, in the dust-swept soil of Redemption Gulch. Weeks turned into months, and the ranch, under the combined efforts of Ethan and Sarah, began to truly flourish. The garden yielded a bounty of vegetables. The chickens laid steadily, and the small herd of cattle grew healthier. Sarah found a quiet contentment in the routine, in the tangible results of her labor. The harsh beauty of the Arizona landscape, once daunting, now held a certain allure, and the quiet presence of Ethan had become a comforting constant. Their unspoken bond, forged in shared work and silent understanding, deepened with each passing day. One scorching afternoon, Ethan rode into Redemption Gulch for supplies. Sarah stayed behind, tending to the laundry. The rhythmic scrub of the washboard was a soothing sound in the stillness. The sun beat down relentlessly, shimmering off the dry earth, and the only break in the silence was the distant caw of a crow. When Ethan returned, just before dusk, Sarah noticed a subtle change in him. His usual quiet demeanor was tinged with a new, almost imperceptible tension. He dismounted, unsaddled his horse, and carried the sacks of flour and sugar into the house with his customary efficiency. But his movements seemed a fraction stiffer, his gaze more distant. "Everything all right in town?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual as she put away the supplies. Ethan paused, his back to her, as he placed a sack of coffee on the shelf. "Same as always," he grunted, but his voice lacked conviction. He didn't look at her. Sarah's senses, sharpened by months of living in close proximity to this quiet man, picked up on the subtle shift. She knew him well enough now to recognize the signs of something amiss. She didn't press, knowing he would speak when he was ready, or not at all. Later, as they ate their supper of beans and cornbread, the silence in the small house felt heavier than usual. Ethan ate slowly, his eyes often drifting to the window, as if expecting something. Sarah felt a prickle of unease. The next morning, the source of Ethan's disquiet became terrifyingly clear. After breakfast, as Sarah was sweeping the porch, a rider approached the ranch. It wasn't one of the usual neighbors, nor was it a traveling salesman. This man was different. He rode a sleek, dark horse, and his clothes, though dusty, were of a finer cut than most in the territory. He was lean, with a sharp, almost predatory look in his eyes, and a thin, cruel smile that seemed to be permanently etched on his face. Sarah felt an icy dread creep up her spine. Her broom clattered to the floor. Her breath hitched. She knew this man, or rather, she knew the type. He was a shadow from her past, a living embodiment of the fear that had driven her across a continent. Ethan, who had been mending a fence near the corral, straightened up. His hand instinctively went to the pistol holstered at his hip. He had seen the rider approach, and the way Sarah froze, her face draining of color, told him everything he needed to know. That the rider reined in his horse a few yards from the house, kicking up a cloud of dust. His gaze swept over the ranch, then settled on Sarah. A slow, knowing smirk spread across his face. Well, if it isn't little Sarah Miller," the man drawled. His voice was a low, gravelly sound that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. "Or should I say Mrs. Cole now? Heard you landed on your feet, girl. Quite the surprise." Sarah couldn't speak. Her throat was tight, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt trapped, exposed. The fragile peace she had built around herself was shattering into 1,000 pieces. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself subtly between Sarah and the stranger. His voice was calm, level, but with an underlying steel. "State your business, mister. You're on private land." The man's eyes, cold and calculating, flickered to Ethan, assessing him. "No business with you, cowboy. My business is with the lady." He dismounted slowly, deliberately, his hand hovering near his own gun. "Sarah and I have some unfinished matters to discuss." "She's my wife," Ethan stated. His voice was unwavering. "Her matters are my matters." The stranger let out a short, humorless laugh. "Is that so? And what exactly do you know about your wife, Mr. Cole? Do you know why she ran halfway across the country? Do you know about the debts she left behind, the promises she broke?" His words were laced with venom, designed to wound, to expose. Sarah flinched, her face burning with shame and fear. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into the dry earth. Ethan's gaze remained steady on the man. "Doesn't matter what I know. She's here now, and she's under my protection." The stranger's smirk widened. "Protection, huh? You think you can protect her from everything, cowboy? From her past? From me?" He took a step forward, his eyes never leaving Sarah. "Your father's business, Sarah. It didn't just disappear. Someone had to pay for his follies, and that someone was supposed to be you." The mention of her father, of the devastating circumstances that had forced her flight, was a physical blow. Sarah felt dizzy again, the world threatening to spin out of control. "I have nothing," she cried out. Her voice was raw with desperation. "He took everything. I left with nothing but the clothes on my back." "Oh, but you did, Sarah," the man purred. Taking another step, "You left with a promise to pay. And I'm here to collect." Ethan moved swiftly, placing himself fully in front of Sarah, shielding her. "You'll collect nothing here," he said. His hand now rested firmly on the butt of his pistol.